This is compilation of creepy stories. Get comfortable because I'm about to begin. Minecraft. I was playing a pirated version of Minecraft and something was wrong with it. I had wanted to play Minecraft for months. My friend Kenny knew this, and he also knew I was broke. So he generously got me a copy of the game. I didn't ask where or how he got it. So on Friday night, I launched the game, probably a pirated version. After a stressful week, my house was quiet. My boyfriend was out for the night with his friends. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, curled up desperately in a blanket, and got ready to play. I already knew a bit about how to play, having watched too many YouTube videos on it. I spawned in a field with a few cubic trees. A square sun hung over the hill in front of me. I headed towards it, running left and right, trying to scout the area. Strangely, I didn't see any animals, no pigs, sheep, or chickens. But I didn't spend too much time exploring. I was playing in survival mode. I knew what I needed to do: chop wood, find coal and cobblestone, and build a shelter to stay safe at night. I wanted to build a cute little house in the field. But I didn't have enough time, so I dug a hole in the hillside. I attached a torch to the wall, dug a 1x1 window, and waited out the night. That's when things started to get weird. After a few minutes, the first mobs began to appear, but they weren't the usual nighttime mobs. Not zombies, skeletons, archers, or creepers. Only one type of mob appeared. It was a villager-like creature with grayish skin. The strangest part was their eyes. They weren't just pixelated eyes. They were meticulously detailed, round, bloodshot, with no irises. And they let kids play this, I muttered to myself. God, my mum would never let me play this. Several mobs gathered at my window. Unlike zombies, they made no sounds. I spent the whole night watching their grey silhouettes flit in and out of view. Sometimes they collided with each other, each trying to peer through my window to see me. There was something else odd. As far as I could tell, there were no stars or moon in the sky. It was just black. I huddled against the wall in my little hideout until the sun came up. Those creepy creatures disappeared, nowhere to be seen. Okay, I told myself. I guess today I'll try to gather resources. I made a wooden pickaxe, then a stone one. I dug dirt and stone, going deeper and deeper until I hit a cave. It was very dark down there. I took one of my torches and attached it to the wall. Stone, coal, and some white stone. Cool, I muttered to myself, mining the coal. Then I ventured forward into the darkness, placing another torch on the wall as I went. This continued until I ran out of torches. But right, I have more coal now, I thought. I quickly made some more torches and kept going. The cave started to slope downwards, becoming steeper, with drops of 2, sometimes 3 blocks. Still, I kept going, knowing the deeper I went, the higher the chances of finding diamonds. But I couldn't mine them with a stone pickaxe. I knew that from all those YouTube videos. But this cave didn't quite resemble the ones I had seen in the videos. I thought there would be zombies and other scary mobs. They are in caves, and those giant spiders too. But I still hadn't seen a single living creature here. I went deeper, and then I started hearing something really creepy, a sort of low whistling sound. I looked around, searching for the source of the sound, but all I saw were my torches, flickering above and stretching into the distance. I continued descending into the cave further and further. This is all very strange, I thought, because I should have come across lava or bedrock, which would prevent me from going any deeper. But this cave seemed to go lower and lower and didn't want to end. There were no signs of diamonds either. I stopped on a small stone platform before descending a steeper slope. I took out my pickaxe. This seems like as good a place to mine as any, I thought, sinking the pickaxe into the stone. I had seen videos on how to mine diamonds, how to optimally build tunnels and all that. Who knows, maybe I'll get lucky and find some iron along the way. For some reason, the only ore I saw was coal. I watched as cracks appeared on the stone block. "Stupid stone pickaxe," I grumbled, and eventually it broke. I started mining the next block. I only managed to go a few blocks before my pickaxe broke with a snap. "Damn it," I said, sighing. I turned to make a crafting table and froze. There, at the entrance to my tunnel, stood one of those gray creatures. He stared at me with his white, bloodshot eyes. They were highly detailed compared to the rest of his pixelated body. He didn't move, didn't come closer to me, just stood there and looked straight at me. "You little underscore," I said, grabbed my stone sword and ran towards him. Then I froze again. Something caught my attention. Something not in the game, but in real life. No, the small white light next to my camera was on. I snapped my laptop shut and put it on the floor. Then I just sat there, breathing heavily, my whole body numb. With shaking hands, I took my phone and sent a message. "Where exactly did you get this copy of Minecraft for me? Pause 3S. A man without face. I married my wife Anna about 3 months ago." One evening we were sitting at our table drinking wine after dinner. We were just joking around and having fun as usual before starting serious conversations. She asked me, "What was the worst job you've ever had? Just the most awful place you've ever worked?" Usually I would respond to such questions with some nonsense about working in a store or a restaurant. But I was in a bit of a talkative mood, so I gave a real answer. When I was 16, I was a babysitter for an 8-year-old girl who lived on my street. Her name was Samantha. Her parents knew our parents, so they trusted me without any worries. Sam's parents often went out for dinner or to the movies or somewhere else, and I would just feed her macaroni and cheese and put her to bed. I earned about $50 a night, which was a decent amount for a teenager. I did this job a few times a week for about 6 months. But one day in the last month of my job, things started to get really weird. At first I just thought Sam had a very vivid imagination for a child. But I quickly realized that she never lied. She was always 100% honest. It all started normally. I was getting her ready for bed, and she came down to me on the first floor, saying there was something in her closet. I just took her back to her room and showed her that there was nothing in the closet, but she kept insisting that there was something there. After several nights of her claiming that there was something in her closet, that something started to move. She began to say that it was under her bed, then in the hallway, and finally, it settled on her ceiling, where it stayed. She always complained that something was on her ceiling, and I had to read her bedtime stories to help her fall asleep. But then, even stranger things started happening. She said that some objects moved. Even then it scared me. Though I had his exact description, I still wasn't ready for the moment when I finally saw him. This creature didn't let Sam sleep properly, and she started having hallucinations. She began to scream uncontrollably, hiding behind me until her parents came home. I tried to warn her parents, but they kept dismissing it as just children being children. Each night it got worse and worse. One night I was comforting Sam, trying to soothe her while she cried. But then I started falling asleep, and so did she. After I woke up for a while, I opened my eyes but couldn't move. Trying to call for help was useless. Then I saw him out of the corner of my right eye. I saw a tall, lanky man. He had no hair on his body, and as Sam said, he had no eyes, no eye sockets, no indentations where they should be, just a flat surface from his forehead to his nose. His skin was pale, but he had some marks all over his body. Some marks were black, others red, and they looked like they were bleeding. I tried to scream, but it was useless. He came up to me, stroked my cheek with his finger. Even though he had no eyes, I could tell he was studying me. Then he ran his fingers through my hair, rubbed my earlobes, and grabbed my face, jerking it left and right to get a better look at me. He leaned closer to me. I heard his mouth open. He started licking his lips, continuing to sniff my neck. He opened his mouth and let out one big sigh. The room became very cold. I tried to move my arms to warm up, but I still couldn't move. Tears started streaming down my face. I couldn't speak. I couldn't fight him, but worst of all, I couldn't help Sam. The man leaned over and grabbed her face with his hand, and right before my eyes, she turned pale. He covered her mouth with his hands and looked at me. I saw one of the red marks on his hand stop bleeding and turn black like the others. Then I didn't notice when he left. I was left alone with lifeless Sam. The cops arrived. Her parents were in terrible grief for several years. Her father always blamed me for her no longer being there. I tried to tell the police about what I had seen, but they didn't believe me. The autopsy report showed that her heart had stopped. They said she died of natural causes. I will never forget how scared she was and how I wished I could have done more to help her. My wife was in tears the whole time. "I'm so sorry, Elliot. You did everything you could," she said, stroking my cheek. So yes, that was the worst job of my life. Now, I'm curious to hear about the worst jobs my readers have had. I'll read your comments late at night. Lately, I've been having trouble sleeping, and as I sit here finishing up this post, I swear all this time I've been hearing something in my closet. Survived. My grandfather survived the Titanic, and he told me what really happened during the voyage. I had always idolized my grandfather as he was a very important person in my life. Even in his later years, he could calmly recall conversations from 20 years ago. I learned that he had been a passenger aboard the Titanic, but he refused to talk about it. I became obsessed with the story of the Titanic and wanted to make a presentation about it for my school. For the first time in his life, my grandfather raised his voice at me after I started begging him to tell me the story. He scolded me, and I was scared because I had never seen him like that. I went to my bedroom and started crying because I was young and frightened by what had happened. He came into my room and apologized for his behavior. I could see the regret on his face. The next morning, I went downstairs and saw him sitting at the table with a sad expression. He asked me to sit down, and I reluctantly agreed. His face showed conflicting emotions as he said he would tell me what really happened on the Titanic. He made me promise not to tell anyone because he feared people would think he was crazy. I sat stunned as he began to tell the story. I was only 7 years old when I boarded the Titanic. It seemed gigantic compared to me, and I was in awe of how beautiful everything was. There were so many people everywhere, all friendly and smiling. I stood at the edge of the ship, waving to the people on the dock as we prepared to set sail. It was one of the happiest moments of my life because I had never felt such joy. My parents took me to my room once we were underway, as they wanted to enjoy a walk around the ship. I knew they had spent most of our money on tickets because they always dreamed of living in America. That's the journey the Titanic never completed. On the second day of the voyage, I began to notice strange behavior among some of the passengers. They were coughing heavily, their eyes were red. My father assured me that it was nothing to worry about, but I remember he seemed scared himself. He left for a few minutes with a wrench, saying it was just for protection. The next morning, I woke up to screams coming from the room next door. I jumped out of bed and rushed to see what was happening. A group of people was already standing in front of the door, and I couldn't squeeze past them to get a better look. I froze, staring at the scene inside the room. A man lay on the floor with his stomach ripped open, and his children were playing with his entrails. I was pushed aside as crew members burst into the room and grabbed those little psychos. They looked like rabid animals. We were escorted back to our room while they cleaned up the mess. I wandered around the ship all day and noticed many people starting to look sick. On the fourth day, I woke up to screams and running in the corridor outside my cabin. I peeked outside and was shocked to see the hallway covered in blood. I quickly closed the door and went to wake my parents, but they weren't in the cabin. I didn't know what to do because I was afraid to leave the room, but I was also scared to stay alone. A long time passed before I finally mustered the courage. I crept to the door and peeked outside. To my relief, the hallway was empty. Only the distant sounds of the engines and occasional screams could be heard. I remembered there was a kitchen further down the corridor where I could probably find something to eat. It took me forever to get through the hallway, trying not to step on the blood or bloody clothes. Once I reached the kitchen, I almost vomited when I saw the bodies inside. They looked like someone had stabbed them 100 times. These were crew members and passengers. I grabbed some food that was within reach and ran away. I quickly ate everything and started searching the ship. In every corridor I encountered more bodies. Many of them looked like their stomachs had been slit open. It was getting dark, and I began to worry that everyone else on board was dead. I turned a corner and suddenly my bladder emptied as a gun was pointed at my face. I stood there trembling with fear while a crew member stared at me for a few moments. He lowered the gun and ran off, leaving me standing alone. It took me some time to gather my thoughts. By then it was completely dark, and I heard distant gunshots in the direction the crew member had run. I wondered who he was shooting at. I was knocked off my feet when the ship shook with a deafening crash. I ran aside and saw a massive iceberg we must have hit. Ice began to fall onto the deck, and I had to move away to avoid getting hit. I watched as the iceberg moved away from the ship and wondered how severe the damage was. I heard a noise behind me and felt relief when I saw my father. I ran towards him but stopped when I saw his clothes covered in blood. His eyes met mine, and I started trembling because his gaze was that of an animal, not a human. He let out a guttural growl and began running straight at me. But suddenly my father was thrown back. I turned and saw the crew member still holding the gun. He looked at me for a few moments and signaled for me to follow him. He moved very quickly and I struggled to keep up. He peered around every corner as we passed dozens of bodies. Finally, we reached an area with many survivors. Some were trying to lower lifeboats while others were fending off other passengers who seemed intent on eating them. They managed to lower the lifeboats and began slowly evacuating the survivors. The ship was slowly sinking at that point, and the crew member desperately tried to save as many people as he could. Our lifeboat moved away from the ship, and I saw dozens of passengers running back and forth, attacking each other. The ship began sinking under the waves, and most people were left at the rear of the ship. I turned away, not wanting to see any more of it. The survivors in the boat were crying because none of us could understand what had happened. A few hours later, other ships arrived, and we were rescued. My mother survived on another lifeboat, and we tearfully reunited. The owners of the Titanic offered my mother a substantial sum of money to never speak a word about it, and she agreed. I think most survivors preferred to forget that it ever happened, so everyone took the offer. I remember reading newspapers later and wondering if anyone would ever find out what really happened. I stared in shock at my grandfather as he finished his story, because I couldn't believe what I had just heard. A tear rolled down his cheek, and then he asked me to promise to keep it a secret. That night I went to bed intending to ask him more questions in the morning. My mother found him dead the next morning. He had a heart attack during the night. I am posting this now in hopes of finding others whose family members survived the Titanic. I really want to know the full story of what happened. I reached the kitchen and nearly vomited when I saw the bodies inside. They looked like they had been attacked with a knife 100 times. These were crew members and passengers. I grabbed everything within reach and ran away. After quickly eating everything, I began searching the ship, encountering new corpses in every corridor. Many of them had their stomachs ripped open. It was getting dark, and I started to worry that everyone else on board was dead. I turned a corner and suddenly my bladder emptied as a gun was pointed at my face. I stood there trembling with fear while a crew member stared at me for a few moments. He lowered the gun and ran off, leaving me standing alone. It took me some time to gather my thoughts. By then it was completely dark. I heard distant gunshots in the direction the crew member had run and wondered who he was shooting at. I was knocked off my feet when the ship shook with a deafening crash. I ran aside and saw a massive iceberg that we must have hit. Ice began to fall, and I had to move away to avoid getting hit. Looking at the iceberg, I wondered how severe the damage was. I heard a noise behind me and felt relieved when I saw my father. I ran towards him, but stopped when I saw his clothes covered in blood. His eyes met mine, and I started trembling because his gaze was that of an animal, not a human. He let out a guttural growl and began running straight at me, but suddenly my father was thrown back. Turning around, I saw the crew member still holding the gun. He looked at me for a few moments and signaled for me to follow him. He moved very quickly and I struggled to keep up. He peered around every corner and we passed dozens of bodies. Finally, we reached an area with many survivors. Some were trying to lower lifeboats while others were fending off passengers who seemed intent on eating them. They managed to lower the lifeboats and began slowly evacuating the survivors. The ship was slowly sinking at that point, and the sailor desperately tried to save as many people as he could. Our lifeboat moved away from the ship, and I saw dozens of passengers running back and forth, attacking each other. A few hours later, other ships arrived, and we were rescued. My mother survived in another lifeboat, and we tearfully reunited. The owners of the Titanic offered my mother a substantial sum of money to never speak a word about it, and she agreed. I remember reading newspapers later and wondering if anyone would ever find out what really happened. I stared in shock at my grandfather as he finished his story, because I couldn't believe what I had just heard. A tear rolled down his cheek, and then he asked me to promise to keep it a secret. That night, I went to bed intending to ask him more questions in the morning. My mother found him dead the next morning. He had a heart attack during the night.